The Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, Postal Service in the District of Columbia. Hearing will now come to order. I understand we have many things going on the floor today, and I think the ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz, is there now, and we are also expecting some members to come over. So we'll have to do the best we can, and in the event that members are not present, we will allow them in the record to submit testimony at a later time. I do want to welcome the members who are here and the hearing witnesses, all those in attendance. The purpose of this hearing is to examine a host of issues confronting the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board as it upgrades the TSPs, the thrift saving plans, infrastructure, and security capabilities in response to multiple legislative initiatives, regulatory proposals, and a changed financial landscape. The Chair, Ranking Member, and Subcommittee members will each have 5 minutes to make opening statements, and all members will have 3 days within which to add statements to the records and any other incidental documents. Ladies and gentlemen, despite recent signs of economic recovery, the past year has been a fairly tumultuous year in the financial world, which is why I've called today's hearing to discuss and assess the status of the Thrift Savings Plan. Millions of Americans have lost a significant portion of their 401k retirement savings during the latest market downturn, and the TSP, which is basically our 401k of the federal community, has not been immune. As many federal employee TSP accounts can demonstrate, they have also been significantly diminished in size. Given the absolutely integral role that TSP plays in determining the future retirement income of FERS employees, I feel it is critically important that the subcommittee conduct routine oversight of this aspect of the federal employees' retirement system. Therefore, today's hearing is intended to compare the TSP's performance against private sector plans, as well as to discuss whether federal employees, annuitants, and survivors have been given the right plan and the proper tools to build an adequate retirement. Additionally, the recent enactment of the tobacco bill, H.R. 1256, included several major TSP-related provisions, which I'm proud to highlight, were also included in a bill introduced, H.R. 1263, such as instituting both auto-enrollment and immediate agency contributions, as well as creating a Roth 401k option and authorizing a mutual fund window. These recent changes deserve our close attention, especially during the critical developmental and implementation stages, which again point to the relevance of today's hearing. I'd also like to note the need for further debate over the addition of a mutual fund window feature for the TSP. As this option is being pondered, I believe it's important that we all have some level of understanding about the potential impact such changes could have on raising the costs and administrative fees, while at the same time giving fair consideration to the need to provide TSP participants with adequate investment options. Today's hearing will also provide us the chance to hear from the board about the upcoming rollout of the new TSP website and its recent $18 million capital investment. Further, today's hearing will provide employees' representative groups with opportunities to share suggested regulatory and/or legislative proposals. It's my hope that the testimony and feedback we receive today will provide the committee with precise guidance and direction. Again, I thank each of you for being with us this afternoon, and I look forward to your participation. This concludes my opening statement, and I will now yield to my friend and colleague, Mr. Chaffetz, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a fan of Just in Time, I got to tell you, I appreciate your patience and indulgence. I know I'm a few minutes late, having been detained there on the floor, but I appreciate your participation and everybody here today and the expertise that you bring to bear and the important matters that we discussed today.
The gentleman yield.
Yes,
the stenographer cannot hear you.
Oh, my apologies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing on such an important matter. The Thrift Savings Plan is a central component of the federal employee retirement system, often referred to as FERS, and its success is critical from a number of different standpoints. Clearly, the kind of retirement an employee is offered at a given job has a significant impact upon the employer's ability to recruit and retain people with the best skills and qualifications. Therefore, it is important that the TSP is managed carefully and properly, which means regular congressional oversight and legislation when necessary. This has been one of the most challenging economic years the country has had in decades, and we are not out of the woods yet, by no means. The timing of this economic crisis has truly been tragic for a number of reasons. The federal government is disproportionately top-heavy with employees who are rapidly approaching federal retirement, and now many of them find that while their defined benefits are intact, most FERS employees have taken a massive hit to their retirement savings. We all know that in the world of investments, there are always ups and downs. The way of measured success of long-term investment is not in the snapshot of a year, but over the life of an investment. This hearing will give us a chance to find out whether the TSP and others responsible for its management believe they have the necessary tools to complete the job, or if there are things that we in Congress can do to help. The Thrift Savings Plan Enhancement Act of 2009 was signed into law in June and made several improvements to the function of the TSP. Perhaps most significantly, the Roth-type investment options was offered, allowing participants to pay taxes on retirement savings now rather than upon withdrawal. This is a great tool, especially for younger employees at the lower end of their earnings spectrum. However, this tool has been available in the rest of the investment world for decades. We also know that the TSP continues to have fewer investment options than most private retirement programs. With that said, the TSP continues to outperform most private 401ks and is unparalleled in its low associated administrative costs. The TSP can be frustrating to navigate, however. I believe that how the TSP interfaces with its participants is critical to its continued success in participation. Improvements can still be made. When we introduce these new investment tools, as we did in June of this year, we must also see that its participants are fully informed of their available options. I look forward to working with the chairman and those responsible for managing the system to ensure that federal employees continue to have one of the best investment vehicles available anywhere, and appreciate the input and suggestion from the participants. Again, I thank you for your participation and your being here today, and I'll yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I won't take that much time. And I do appreciate you holding this hearing today. The Federal Employees Thrift Savings Plan is one of the best retirement plans offered by any employer. Under the plan, the government contributes a specific dollar amount or percentage of pay into an employee's account, which can be invested in stocks, bonds, or other financial instruments. This is an excellent program which many of our federal employees benefit from greatly. And we must do all that we can in our power to ensure that it remains vibrant and strong. The enactment of the Thrift Savings Plan back in 2009 brought about some welcome changes to the program. That act permits new federal employees to begin contributing to the TSP immediately rather than waiting 6 to 12 months. Early participation in the federal employees' retirement system, particularly in the Thrift Savings Plan, is critical if an employee is going to maximize the amount of savings earned for his or her retirement. Not only does the Act include provisions to eliminate the waiting period requirements, but it authorizes automatic enrollment for all new federal civil employees. Currently, the TSP has 4.2 million participants. Automatic enrollment will largely increase participation in the savings plan. The Act also authorizes adding a new Roth 401k investment option, allowing participants to contribute after-tax dollars to the TSP, therefore allowing them to withdraw contributions associated earnings tax-free and associated earnings tax-free. Lastly, this act would allow spouses of deceased federal employees to leave funds in the TSP and become the managers of those accounts. I'm eager to hear how some of these provisions will be rolled out, the timeframes of these changes, along with the new proposals, such as the unused annual leave proposition, allowing employees to deposit their unused annual leave into their TSP accounts. The TSP holds approximately $234 billion in assets, making it the world's largest defined contribution plan. Hearings like this are important to ensure that the program continues to serve the best interests of federal employees, uniformed services, reserves, and their spouses. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes, actually, I know that the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Gao, has declined the opportunity to make a 5-minute statement, but I do want to, since you are a new appointee to the committee, I did want to welcome you on behalf of the committee and invite you to become, deeply involved in the issues that come before the committee, but by all means, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very honored to be in this committee and to address the many issues that we are facing in this country, and I hope that my contributions through this committee can somehow have a certain impact to some of the problems that we are facing.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Northern Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. Since it represents a substantial portion of most federal employees' retirement savings, the Thrift Savings Plan is of vital importance to the federal workforce. It's the largest defined contribution retirement plan arguably on earth, with 4.2 million participants and $234 billion in assets. In the past, some have attempted to use the TSP to promote political objectives. Fortunately, the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board and Employee Thrift Advisory Council have successfully fended off those efforts, and as a result, the TSP has more value today. Shortly before the real estate bubble burst, for example, some suggested that the TSP should have another fund which would be invested in real estate investment trusts. Federal employees' retirement savings are safer today because we did not make that investment at the height of the real estate market. The REIT index declined 40% just between January and April of this year. Others have suggested creating gold, copper, or other specialized TSP funds. Although Congress did give the Thrift Investment Advisory Board authority to invest in funds such as mutual funds, it did not force the board to do so. The TSP already has 6 funds. One consists entirely of U.S. Treasury bonds. The others are a variety of index funds. All of these funds represent fairly secure investments over the long run, unlike more specialized investments in assets that could fluctuate more than a diversified portfolio. Because the TSP replaced part of federal employees' defined benefit pensions in 1986, it is appropriate that this fund be invested in a conservative manner that will maximize federal employees' retirement security. The Thrift Advisory Board is considering creating an option for federal employees to invest their savings in mutual funds through the TSP. Given the historically strong performance of the TSP, including its superior maintenance of value during the recent crisis relative to many other privately managed funds, I find it hard to understand why such a change would be advantageous for federal employees. Moreover, as the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association has noted, creating additional mutual fund options could drive up TSP's administrative costs. Currently, just 80 TSP employees manage the world's largest 401k. We should be very cautious about proposals that might reduce the efficiency of this agency. For these reasons, the Employee Thrift Advisory Council has resisted attempts to create mutual fund options within the TSP. In written testimony, the American Federation of Government Employees, the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, and the Senior Executives Association all have expressed reservations about establishing mutual fund windows for TSP. During apartheid, some members of Congress unsuccessfully attempted to divest TSP investments from companies that did business in South Africa with that government. More recently, others have proposed divesting from companies that are concerned with the genocide in Sudan. I'd be interested, Mr. Chairman, in learning more about whether we could establish and should establish social responsibility criteria within the TSP without reducing the security of federal employees' retirement or efficiency in administering the TSP. Again, I want to thank you, Chairman Lynch, for holding this hearing. I applaud the TSP Employee Advisory Council and the Advisory Board for resisting past attempts to make potentially risky investments and look forward to working with these groups to protect the security of the TSP as we move forward. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Before we move to witness testimony, I'd like to offer brief introductions of our panelists. Greg Long is the Executive Director of the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, the agency that administers the TSP, and serves as CEO and Managing Fiduciary. Prior to his appointment as Executive Director, Mr. Long was the TSP's Director of Product Development, where he was responsible for strategic planning and the development of new services and savings products. James Sauber is the Chief of Staff to the President of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Frederick Orlando. In addition to his role at the letter carriers, Mr. Sauber has served on the voluntary basis since 2003 as the elected chairman of the statutorily created Employee Thrift Advisory Council called ETAC. I'll try to keep the acronyms to a minimum today. J. David Cox is the National Secretary-Treasurer of the American Federation of Government Employees, the nation's largest union representing federal and D.C. government employees. Previously, Mr. Cox served as the co-chair of the Veterans Affairs National Partnership Council from 1999 to 2000, and again from 2002 to 2006. President Colleen Kelly is the president of the National Treasury Employees Union, the nation's largest independent federal sector union representing employees in 31 different government agencies. Ms. Kelly is a former IRS revenue agent and was first elected to the union's top post in August of 1999. Richard Strombotny has represented the senior, wait a minute, we're out of order here. Okay, why don't Margaret, I'm sorry. I'll go with you. They have the pages out of order. Margaret L. Baptiste was re-elected for a second two-year term as the National Association of Retired Federal Employees National President in September 2008. She is the first woman to be elected as NARF President and first spouse of a federal retiree to hold the position. Richard Strombotny has represented the Senior Executives Association on ETAC for 10 years as a charter member of the SEA, the Senior Executives Association. He served on its board of directors for 8 years. Additionally, Mr. Strombotny has been extensively involved with the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association. And last but certainly not least, Colonel Michael Hayden, U.S. Air Force retired, and joined the MOAA legislative team in July 2005 upon completion of a 25-year military career in air and space operations, personnel, recruiting, training, and education. At the MOAA, he focused on active duty and retirement compensation issues. That concludes the introduction of our witnesses. However, it is the custom and practice at this committee to swear witnesses so that they may offer testimony on the record. May I please ask you to rise and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will be giving before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record indicate that each witness answered in the affirmative. Your entire statement is already included in the record. We will now move to the testimony portion, and I would just advise you those small boxes in front of you, one which is working, one which is not working. The green light indicates you may proceed with your testimony. A yellow light indicates you should probably wrap it up, and the red light indicates that your time has expired. And I'll try to hold since we have a large panel here, I'll try to hold everybody to the 5-minute limit. But Mr. Long, you're welcome and recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Chairman Lynch and members of the subcommittee, my name is Greg Long. I'm the Executive Director of the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. The 5 members of the board and I serve as the fiduciaries of the TSP for federal employees and members of the Uniformed Services. The TSP, as you said, is the largest defined contribution retirement plan in the world. Accounts are maintained for more than 4.2 federal and postal employee members of the Uniformed Services and retirees. As of September 30th, the TSP had approximately $234 billion in retirement savings. Your letter of invitation explained that the purpose of this hearing is to examine a host of issues, including upgrades to the TSP's information technology, security capabilities, legislative initiatives, regulatory proposals, and a changed financial landscape. I am pleased to discuss each of these matters. Before I do, however, I'd like to note that I am surrounded by individuals representing organizations whose knowledge and commitment to the TSP goes back 26 years. Their knowledge and support have been essential in making the TSP the success that it is today. Turning our attention to IT infrastructure. It's appropriate that IT infrastructure and security are the first items cited in your letter, The fiscal year 2010 budget, approved by the board just last month, demonstrates our commitment to infrastructure, security, and other vital record-keeping activities. $99 million, or approximately 76% of our total budget, is dedicated to these areas. We have an ambitious agenda to improve the TSP. The Thrift Savings Plan Enhancement Act of 2009 provides substantial new benefits which we must implement. Further, other improvements like updating the TSP website and implementing e-messaging capabilities demand agency resources. The TSP's expenses are borne not by the taxpayers, but by participants. During 2008, the TSP expense ratio was 2 basis points, or 20 cents for every $1,000 invested by a participant. This compares very favorably to other similar plans. Despite our low administrative expenses, we nevertheless maintain a robust IT infrastructure to support activities. Attached to my statement is a status report presented by the agency's Director of Automated Systems to the board and to ETAC at the joint meeting we held last October. You'll note that that report covers our recently completed capital investments for our systems modernization, as well as a status report on data center and software applications. On April 29th of last year, I appeared before this subcommittee to express the board's support for automatically enrolling newly hired employees in the TSP. As the Congress developed its legislation on that issue, it added provisions which bring the TSP up to date with comparable private sector 401k plans in a number of areas. Together, these legislative changes make the TSP an even more flexible and valuable program. I come before you today to say thank you and to describe our plans for implementing these multiple legislative initiatives. First is immediate agency contributions. As soon as the new law was signed on June 22nd, the waiting period for FERS employees to receive agency contributions was eliminated. All FERS employees should now be receiving agency automatic 1% contributions, and if they are contributing their own money, agency matching contributions as well. Next is accounts for spouse beneficiaries. Beginning in the spring of 2010, if a participant dies and the spouse is the beneficiary of the participant's TSP account, the spouse will have the option of leaving the death benefit payment in the TSP in his or her own name. Third, automatic enrollment. Starting next spring, newly hired federal civilian employees will automatically make payroll contributions of 3% of pay to the TSP. Their agencies will send these contributions to the TSP along with an additional amount equaling 4% of pay, which is made up of 1% automatic and 3% matching contributions each pay period, unless the employee decides to opt out or contribute a different amount. This will give new employees a chance to start saving earlier, to receive agency contributions, and potentially reach greater levels of retirement security. Fourth is the Roth feature. In 2011, we plan to offer a Roth feature, which will be the equivalent of a private sector Roth 401k. This is subject to different tax rules than a Roth IRA and open to people of all income levels. Employee contributions to the Roth TSP will be made on an after-tax basis, and participants will generally not have to pay federal income tax on money they withdraw from it. We estimate it will take about 2 years to implement this benefit. It will require substantial modifications to agency as well as Uniform Services human resource and personnel systems, as well as our own TSP systems and their accounting and associated systems. The fifth feature is the mutual fund window. This legislation allows the TSP to offer a mutual fund window in the future. This would allow participants to invest some of their TSP savings in mutual funds outside of the TSP. Expenses related to the mutual fund window would be borne solely by those participants who use it. The TSP has not set any implementation target or date. We will further consider this operation in cooperation with the unions and associations that make up ETAC.
Mr. Long, you need to wrap up.
The regulatory proposals are simply unused leave. That is something which requires a change to FERSA, and we would be happy to work with the Congress and ETAC in getting that done. And finally, the limits on interfund transfers is a policy that we implemented last year based on a very small number of participants trading very actively, driving expenses, and we've taken steps to eliminate that problem. Thank you very much. I'll be willing to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Mr. Sauber, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay. I represent the National Association of Letter Carriers on the council and served as the council's chair since 2003. The Thrift Savings Plan is an extremely important part of the federal retirement system and is very popular among the 4.2 million federal employees and retirees who maintain TSP accounts. Protecting the $234 billion invested in the TSP, which are the personal assets of our members, is the ETAC's highest priority. We also use the twice-a-year meetings we hold with the board to address administrative issues and service problems. At our most recent meeting on October 19th, we met with the entire board and received briefings on the new TSP website and the agency's ongoing effort to improve its IT infrastructure. On behalf of the ETAC, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership in enacting the TSP Enhancement Act of 2009. Your introduction of H.R. 1263 at the beginning of this Congress got the ball rolling with co-sponsors from both parties. TSP participants very much appreciate the improvements in the plan provided by your bill. The authorization of immediate TSP matching contributions and automatic enrollment will significantly boost participation in the TSP among younger workers and increase the level of savings among new employees. We also very much welcome the legal change that will permit the spouses of deceased participants to keep their inherited funds in the TSP instead of rolling them over into much more expensive plans. Many federal employees will also welcome the Roth option in the TSP when it becomes available, especially the hundreds of thousands of men and women in the armed forces. Thanks again to all of you who supported these improvements. Of course, we will continue to look for new ways to improve the plan. One such improvement springs to mind. Recently, the IRS has ruled that 401k participants may contribute the dollar value of unused leave that might be forfeited or paid out as terminal leave into their plans. ETAC and its organizations urge Congress to amend FERSA to allow this practice in the TSP the next time you take up TSP legislation. We also ask this subcommittee to use its influence to facilitate the prompt appointment and or reappointment of members of the Thrift Investment Board. At present, all 5 members of the board are serving beyond their terms of office. 3 of them, Chairman Andrew Saul and members Alex Sanchez and Gordon Whiting, have expressed interest in being renominated, while 2 have others wish to leave the board. Although all 5 positions of the board are presidential appointments, by law, 2 nominees are recommended by the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. Most of the organizations that make up ETAC have supported the renominations of Saul, Sanchez, and Whiting, both last year with President Bush and this year with President Obama. They performed well and have maintained excellent lines of communications with the ETAC. Congress intended board members to serve staggered terms to promote stability and continuity, and we believe it would be unwise to turn over the entire membership of the board all at one time. We hope the subcommittee will urge the Obama administration to move quickly as possible on these appointments, and that you will encourage the Speaker of the House to do the same with respect to her recommended nominee. Finally, I wish to conclude by noting that federal and postal employees have remained committed to the TSP despite the severe economic crisis. There is no way to sugarcoat the heavy losses experienced by many TSP participants last year. The C, S, and I funds all declined by more than 37% in 2008. Although the equity markets have bounced back somewhat this year, many of our members have had to alter their retirement plans as a result of these TSP losses. One silver lining in the TSP has been the performance of the life cycle funds. Thanks to the diversification provided by the L funds, the losses from last year's meltdown on Wall Street were somewhat mitigated for those who chose them. In fact, the TSP's life cycle funds performed much better than similar funds in the private sector. Losses in the TSP's 2010 fund, for example, were less than half those experienced by investors in 2010 funds offered by Fidelity and Vanguard. Our recent experience serves to remind us of the wisdom shown by Congress when it designed designed FERS back in 1986. It sought to strike a balance between portability and security. TSP is just one component of the 3-legged retirement stool, and thanks to the other 2 legs, guaranteed benefits from Social Security and the FERS basic annuity, the losses incurred last year by federal employees in the TSP will not be catastrophic, even for those close to retirement. Far too many workers in America have seen their defined benefit pensions cashed out, and far too many workers are now exposed to excessive market risk in standalone 401ks. Millions of workers have suffered a sickening blow to their retirement security as a result. We owe it to all of them to rebuild America's pension system once this crisis passes. FERS would be a good model to emulate. Thank you again for inviting me to this hearing.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Mr. Cox, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the policies, regulations, and administration of the TSP. Thrift Savings Plan Enhancement Act of 2009 created many changes for the TSP. AFG supported passage of the bill, but we did not support all of its elements. We strongly supported immediate agency contributions, spousal benefits, Roth-type accounts, and automatic enrollment for new employees. However, establishing a mutual fund window in the TSP is another story. AFG opposed the mutual fund window because we firmly believe that the current collection of investment options within the program is close to optimal. We believe that in almost every case, federal employees who would use the mutual fund window would lower their overall rate of return on their savings. Further, it is not the practice of other defined contribution programs to allow participants to have such a window, largely because it imposes large and unnecessary risk and expense. One of the main virtues of the TSP is its extraordinarily low administrative cost. There is no real benefit for a TSP participant to choose to invest in a private mutual fund rather than the current TSP funds. Mutual fund fees can eat up half or more of an investor's return over time. Unless the TSP is able to negotiate comparable cost, fees, and profits with the investment management companies. AFG believes it's not in the best interest of the plan's participants to pursue the mutual fund window option because the administrators are required, as part of their fiduciary responsibility, to act solely in the interest of the participants. AFG believes that the TSP should not exercise its authority under the law to create the mutual fund window. An important issue left unaddressed last year was to change Title V to allow federal employees to deposit the dollar value of unused annual leave into their TSP accounts. Internal Revenue Service rules now let private sector employees contribute the value of their use or lose paid time off into their 401k accounts as long as the employee would be eligible to receive the dollar value of the unused leave in a lump sum at retirement. Federal employees can convert unused annual leave into a lump sum at retirement. Federal employees are forced to use or lose annual leave. They are subject to limits on the amount of annual leave they can carry over each year. When federal employees retire, they're eligible to receive a lump sum of the dollar value of any unused annual leave. Unfortunately, in order for the federal employees to be able to take advantage of the current IRS rules regarding the deposit of dollar of unused paid leave into their TSP accounts, Congress must amend the current law. AFGE joins with others in urging the lawmakers to make this important change so that federal employees have the same opportunities for retirement savings as their counterparts in the private sector and state and local governments. When Congress was working to develop the Federal Employees Retirement System, FERS, AFG worked hard to make sure that the legislation would require the establishment of an employee advisory committee for the TSP so that the concerns of the employee who financed the bulk of the plan's assets would be heard and considered. The law that was enacted did provide for such a forum, and I'm happy to report that the Employee Thrift Advisory Committee, ETAC, has operated effectively. It has also served to keep federal employees informed and educated on how to make the most of their opportunities under the law. We also believe that federal employees and the Investment Board have benefited immensely from the union's ability to help determine the policy direction of the TSP. Indeed, the ETAC worked so well for both federal employees and the TSP program itself that AFGE is working to establish a similar employee advisory committee for the Federal Employee Health Benefit Program, which lacks any means for federal employee input. We firmly believe that with the establishment of an ETAC-like advisory structure for FEHBP, it might be possible for that program to begin to obtain some of the virtues of the TSP with regard to efficiency and transparency and accountability. The last, Mr. Chairman, is that we believe that TSP has been using a lot of outsourcing for its work, and would encourage the committee to look at the fact that those jobs need to be done in-house and provided by government services because they are inherently governmental. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President Kelly, you now recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Chavitz, and other committee members for being here and for the opportunity to testify on recent developments and plans for the future of the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. Our members have been generally pleased with the Thrift Savings Plan and with Thrift Board policy. We have found low administrative overhead, good return on investments, and an open dialogue. TSP administrative costs compare very favorably with private 401k plans. With input from employee organizations, with informed and prudent leadership by the board and by the TSP managers, and with your oversight, we think there are good systems in place to aid the TSP in remaining an important part of the federal employee's retirement. As we all know, the last couple of years have been a very volatile time for the TSP board and for every plan that's tied to market forces. And we have heard of the many recent advancements and legislative changes to the Thrift Savings Plan. As an active member of the ETAC, NTEU has participated in policy decisions that affect the fund. NTEU's primary concern is protecting the stability and maintaining the viability of the TSP for our members and for all federal employees. Recent changes made to the Thrift Savings Plan, which have been talked about, include the immediate agency contributions and the automatic enrollment provision, and they have been noted, and they are very positive developments for federal employees. Hopefully, they will help employees to start saving for retirement immediately and to maintain or improve their savings rate as they move through their careers. NTEU worked with the board to make sure that the automatic enrollment also includes an opt-out provision so that employees can decline to participate if they find they cannot afford to contribute. The other change that was mentioned that is very important, of course, is the spousal beneficiary account. NTU has heard from several members who are waiting for this option to begin, and we believe this is very valuable reform, and we are very pleased it was part of the final bill. The legislation also created the Roth TSP feature, which we have heard about, and this option requires extensive modification to both agency and TSP record-keeping and accounting systems. While systems updates will be needed to be monitored closely, NTEU views the Roth option as a welcome addition to the plan, especially for younger workers. However, the board must be prepared to educate the federal workforce on the tax planning issues inherent to a Roth option, which are not automatically understood or necessarily easy to understand. And finally, the provision that everyone has talked about, this mutual fund window. You know, in the abstract, NTEU thinks a mutual fund window is a good idea, in the abstract. If a person wanted to invest in only socially conscious firms or in gold or oil futures, one could do that. Having a variety of funds to invest in is a desirable goal. ETAC considered this option, and after a wide range of views were presented, no consensus was reached. The Council believes that the plan has enough diverse accounts within each of the 5 funds, and with the addition of the 5 life cycle funds, participants have excellent opportunities to earn money on their retirement savings. On the other hand, we know there have been some participants who wanted to invest in certain types of stocks that are not available. We look forward to the board's analysis of the cost, the benefit, and the risk associated with mutual funds. NTEU's bottom line on this is, what is it that is the best interest of our members? In his weekly address on September 5th, President Obama focused his remarks on reviving the economy and creating incentives to save. One of those initiatives was to allow employees to invest their employer payouts for unused leave into their retirement plans, as we've heard. On behalf of our members, NTEU contacted both the IRS and the Thrift Board to inquire whether or not this could be applied to federal employees. Many of our members carry over their maximum amount of annual leave on a yearly basis, which is capped at 240 hours, so this could significantly boost their TSP accounts. But both the IRS and the Thrift Board have indicated to NTU that in order for federal employees to take advantage of President Obama's initiative, legislation would be needed to amend the code. While NTU is continuing to pursue this option, along with others, we ask for your help, Mr. Chairman, and for this subcommittee in working together to write and to achieve passage of such legislation. In closing, we appreciate your oversight of the TSP. It is an important part of federal retirement. We need to make sure that the board is working to ensure that all participants understand the changes taking place within the TSP, most importantly, the Roth option and the new spousal benefit. Employees need to be able to make informed choices. There must be a careful and deliberate review before any changes such as the mutual fund window are added. The number one goal is to ensure stability, integrity, and cost efficiency in the TSP so that, as this hearing title today states, the fund will thrive and our retirees will prosper. Thank you, and I'm glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Margaret Baptiste, you recognized for 5 minutes.
We are proud of NARF's work with Congress in 1986 to create the Thrift Savings Plan. Indeed, by any measure, the TSP has been a huge success. Despite the current volatile financial market, we believe the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board has continued to perform admirably. Unfortunately, many TSP participants have had losses during this downturn. Federal workers years away from retirement should have time to recover, but employees at or near retirement don't have that luxury. Most of them will either retire with a smaller nest egg or work until the market rebounds. Retirement plans were created so that employees could avoid working into old age, and also to make room for younger workers to take their places. As employers have migrated away from defined benefit annuities to defined contribution savings plans, the burdens of retirement liabilities and risk have been shifted from employer to employee. But the purpose of retirement programs are negated when workers cannot afford to retire until they make up for lost gains. Fortunately, the retirement security of FERS workers is diversified with the three-legged stool of the TSP, a relatively modest annuity and Social Security benefits. In 1998, a proposal was made which undermined the FERS annuity and diverted the agency and employee contributions for it to a new and separate fund within the TSP. This was and is a bad idea because it threatened the defined benefit of the FERS retirement stool, which, as evidenced by the recent market slump, has become an essential safety net for FERS workers. Still, the FERS annuity lacks the full inflation protection afforded to CSRS workers. That's why NARF supports COLAs for all federally administered retirement programs. What's more, for some federal workers, the Social Security leg of retirement is eroded by the so-called windfall elimination provision, or WEP. NARF supports H.R. 235, legislation to repeal the WEP and the related government pension offset. For years, we have worked to improve the TSP by conforming it to 401k plan rules and by adding new features to the TSP which are consistent with the program's investment philosophy. With your help, Mr. Chairman, we are pleased that several TSP improvements became law in June. For example, the most important enhancement in the program's history was made when newly hired federal employees were automatically enrolled in the TSP, provided an immediate matching contribution. Now more federal employees will be better prepared for their retirement. NARF supported adding a Roth option to allow participants to make after-tax contributions to the plan and withdraw their earnings tax-free upon retirement. In addition, we are happy the new law will give surviving spouses the same rights over their inherited accounts as any other TSP participant. Beyond these improvements, we are concerned about the new self-directed option to allow participants to invest their accounts in funds outside the TSP. Indeed, the administrative costs incurred by funds beyond TSP are usually much higher, and many lack the reduced risk and proven long-term performance of TSP's well-diversified index funds. For that reason, NARF fears that participants could take on too much risk. We urge the Thrift Board to consider limitations on funds invested outside of TSP to ensure that participants do not put all their eggs into one basket. Some have said the self-directed option was included to placate interest in offering single-sector funds in the TSP. The Thrift Board has advised against adding such funds because they conflict with the program's diversified investment strategy. NARF agrees, and we urge Congress and the Thrift Board to base fund decisions on carefully crafted, objective financial analysis and not politics. Still, more must be done to advance the program further. As has been said, President Obama said that employees should have the option of putting payments for unused leave into their 401ks. As a matter of equity, NARF believes that federal workers should have this choice if it is offered to private sector employees. NARF also supports a proposal to allow federal workers to contribute bonuses into their tax-deferred accounts. And while NARF seeks the means to maximize retirement savings, we are concerned that the federal government does not do enough to educate its own workers saving for retirement. We commend you for your interest in making the Thrift Savings Plan continue to thrive, and thank you for inviting us to testify.
Thank you. Mr. Strombatny, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Lynch and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee on the perspective of the Senior Executives Association relating to the Thrift Savings Plan. For the past 10 years, I've served as the representative of the Senior Executives Association on the Employee Thrift Advisory Council. I served as the chairman of SCA's Task Force on Retirement Issues during the mid-1980s, when both the federal employees retirement system and the Thrift Savings Plan were created. And I spearheaded SCA's efforts to ensure that CSRS employees could contribute 5% of their salary to the Thrift Savings Plan. And SCA has participated as a member of the Employee Thrift Advisory Council since its inception. The Thrift Savings Plan has not been a static retirement plan. ETAC and its members have worked together to consider and implement new offerings to upgrade the Thrift Savings Plan and make it more useful to its employees. Over the last decade, such upgrades including adding the small cap and international funds to the original G fund, large cap, and fixed income funds, and adding the option to invest in a life cycle funds, and providing access to Thrift Savings Plan participants, assuring that they can easily access information about their plan and access the account to manage their contributions. The new features that significantly upgrade the Thrift Savings Plan were signed into law by President Obama, and SCA supports the passage of many of these features and believes that they will provide long-term benefits. Much has been said already about the Roth option, and I would applaud that, as well as the automatic enrollment of new employees. But I want to take just a moment to talk about the beneficiary accounts for the surviving spouses. Prior to this change, the spouses of deceased federal employees had a choice of receiving a payout of the Thrift Savings Plan account in a lump sum or transferring the money into a rollover IRA. Neither of these options was ideal, as the lump sum payment had tax consequences and the rollover IRA had higher administrative costs than the Thrift Savings Plan, as you've heard. And the new law allows spouses who are the beneficiary of an account to keep the funds in the Thrift Savings Plan and become the managers of these accounts. It also relieves them of having to make an important financial decision in a time of grief. This was pointed out to me by one of the members of ETAC, and I think it's a good point to make. As the ETAC member who proposed this addition to the Thrift Savings Plan, I was very happy to see it become law and very pleased with the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board's prompt efforts to support its purpose. And Director Long reported at the joint meeting of the board and the council on October 19th that it's already being used. On the mutual fund window, SCA has concerns about the mutual fund window. It's necessary to study this option further to determine whether the cost of implementation is feasible and practical. We have a concern about the likelihood that this would overburden already strapped human resource and personnel offices. It's not at all clear that participants have the necessary investment expertise that would be needed to use a mutual fund window effectively, because it's a riskier investment than traditional funds. With that in mind, the Senior Executives Association urges the Thrift Investment Board to take a cautious approach to opening the newly authorized mutual fund window. As to looking for ways to improve the thrift savings plan in the future, there are two that we think would be very useful. One is to provide the opportunity for employees who receive bonuses and performance awards to contribute those in some amount, 1% ranging to 100%, directly into the thrift savings plan. Military members can do this already, but it's not available for civilian employees. The bonuses are an important part of the compensation package, especially for members of the Senior Executive Service. And the amount of money that a senior executive can contribute to their thrift savings plan is reduced compared with the employees in the GS system. So we recommend that the bonuses and performance awards be included as allowable deposits. And now when employees retire, they receive lump sum payments for their unused annual leave, and they cannot use this as a payout, cannot use this payout to make a deposit. I had the experience of talking with one federal retiree, a woman who retired late in the year. She received the payout of her annual leave in a lump sum. When she received the payment,
Mr. Stromboni, I just have to alert you, you're way over your time.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
Could you wrap up?
Yes, I
Thank
will
you.
conclude.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. I'm through. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well,
but
let me finish
finish
that
your
one
thought,
story,
yeah,
because
please.
the woman, when the lump sum payout was added to her salary she'd already received, it meant that she went over the means test for Medicare, and so her Medicare premiums went up as a result. And that's the final story.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Hayden, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the 375,000 members of the Military Officers Association, I'm grateful for the opportunity to present testimony on MOA's views of recent legislative changes to the Thrift Savings Plan and potential other enhancements that could benefit uniformed service members and their families. The Thrift Savings Plan Enhancement Act of 2009, part of Public Law 11131, signed into law in June of this year, included two noteworthy provisions for uniformed service members and their families, provisions that had MOA's full support. The first provision made some modest future increases in payments to military survivors affected by the offset of DOD's Survivor Benefit Plan by VA's dependency and indemnity compensation. The second provision, which is the focus of my testimony today, authorizes currently serving uniformed service members and federal civilian employees a Roth savings option under the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, a provision we have been advocating for since the advancement of the Roth 401k in 2006. MOA strongly supports a Roth TSP option under which participants prepay taxes on their contributions but watch their Roth savings grow tax-free and enjoy tax-free withdrawals in retirement. Providing a Roth option will be especially attractive for young service members in lower tax brackets, as well as career military people who receive part of their current pay as tax-free allowances, but can expect to have taxable retirement annuities. MOA believes providing a Roth TSP option for currently serving personnel is an equitable and enlightened action, which will improve their long-term financial security. The families of our service members assuredly deserve this option in light of their contributions to our nation. Since the passage of the Act, we are grateful that the Thrift Savings Plan website has been taken a very proactive approach by posting 2 informative fact sheets, one outlining the legislative changes to the Thrift Saving Plan for federal employees and service members, and another that provides frequently asked questions and answers. The Q&A fact sheet makes the following key statements MOA intends to follow closely during the upcoming implementation period. The first is that uniformed members and federal employees could see a Roth TSP implementation as early as January of 2011. The second outlines that there will be no income restrictions on Roth TSP contributions. And finally, the third outlines that the Thrift Savings Plan will develop a plan to educate eligible users on the relative advantages and disadvantages of the Roth versus regular TSP. We believe this third bullet is crucial. Service members must be provided concise decision information in order to determine if a Roth TSP plan is right for them. As for other TSP recommendations, we suggest a TSP conversion. As was the case in the late 90s when a Roth IRA was first introduced, we recommend that with the implementation of a Roth TSP, military and federal employees should be offered the option of converting some or all of their existing TSP accounts to Roth TSP accounts, regardless of their modified adjusted gross income. Providing a conversion option is a win-win for both the participant and the federal government, especially in the current national deficit environment. Participants win by having the option to convert, pay taxes now, and have their TSP earnings grow without tax liability upon withdrawal. Additionally, the federal government wins by garnering more tax revenues now up front. Additionally, MOA supports a change, either in policy or law, that would allow uniformed service members to enjoy the same TSP contribution options that federal employees presently enjoy. MOA, currently service members can only elect a whole percentage option for TSP contributions. Federal civilian employees have the option to contribute either a dollar amount or percentage of pay. We believe that providing a fixed dollar amount option would simplify the process for the service members. Finally, as stated before, we believe a thorough education plan will be instrumental to ensure the Roth rollout is implemented most effectively. Therefore, MOA recommends that TSP bring affected agencies together to include federal agencies and military and veteran service organizations in roundtable discussions to assist in developing the rollout education plan and necessary rulemaking policy. We feel a collaborative effort will produce a much more comprehensive result. So in conclusion, MOA is grateful to the subcommittee for its leadership on this issue and for the commitment of both Congress and the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board to providing this much-needed saving option for federal employees and uniformed service members. We look forward to assisting in the upcoming policymaking and subsequent rollout, as well as to your questions.
Thank you, Colonel. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to say at the outset I'm very happy with the way the Thrift Savings Plan works as a participant. That's my own assessment. And I think it's very good. I agree with Margaret's testimony. I think it's been a great success. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it an 8. There needs to be some improvement. And for instance, the website. The website is definitely, in the video game world, your website is Pong. Very simple, I understand. It's very simple, very basic, very utilitarian, but we can do better, I think. And I know you're already about that. You're already undertaking that, but but I do think it would, it could stand some improvement. I had a chance to talk to, I'm just going to go with the issues that you've been laying out in your testimony. Some of it has overlapped, some not. But as far as using unused sick time for deposit, I think that's a great idea. I think it's out there already for the IRS has approved it. Shame on us for not anticipating that. We could have put it in the previous bill, but I have talked to the ranking member. He's receptive to it, so we'll try to put something together when I have greater attendance in the committee and have a chance to talk to the other members. We'll probably move forward with that sooner rather than later. Also, Mr. Cox, your comments regarding FEHPP and having a similar, advisory group in that sector as you have here, because it's worked out so well, is also something that I'd be welcome. I'd be willing to look at, and I think would be welcome. Let me just say the one issue that's introduced some controversy and difference of opinion here has been the idea of a mutual fund window, and I understand both the arguments, but I think there might be a way to address all those concerns and still allow some flexibility here, and that might be, and I'm just suggesting, limiting the amount that any person, any participant might be able to venture in this this window, whether it's a third of what they have, whether we also, I think there's the real possibility of limiting what's available through the window. In other words, it's not the whole world of mutual funds there, but there might be the ability to screen the cost structure that the union representatives have raised, and also some of the retiree representatives have raised about making sure that the cost structure there is not prohibitive. In other words, to participate and be eligible through that window, you've got to bring your costs down. And I think having $224 billion in the fund gives a certain amount of bargaining power to the TSP to, put out that RFP to some of these funds that might offer these packages. So I think there's some protections that we might introduce if we were going to go forward with this. But they have to be consistent with protecting the retirement of the participant. We can't just have people out there day trading. That would be inconsistent with our overall mission. And lastly, the conversion question that you raised, Colonel Hayden, about converting existing TSP to Roth. I think that's a very interesting issue, and I think the more that Roth becomes available out there, I think that issue will percolate, and so it's going to take some thought, I think. So I think I think it's very, very interesting and worthwhile in discussion. And let me ask this. I know I'm down to the end of my my time, but Mr. Long, the idea of the TSP was really, I think, structured on buy and hold. Buy and hold. Mm-hmm. And that was my strategy, yep. Unfortunately, during this whole economic downturn. And is that something that we need to move away from, or is that something that we can move away from and still maintain the protection and adhere to the central purpose of the TSP?
The policy that's been in place now for over 20 years, I don't think needs to change. This was the people who.
Mr. Long, can we ask you to move closer to the microphone? It's hard to hear you.
The structure of the TSP and the policies behind it, I do not think need to change. As far as the vast majority of participants appreciate the fact that we have a small number of easily understood investment options, the vast majority of them buy and hold, and I don't think that's going to change, nor do I think it should. I think this leads up to the question of the mutual fund window. Is it appropriate? Can we figure out a way to make it work?
Right.
And there are a small number of participants that will, I think, in perpetuity, will always, if the structure doesn't change, will always say, well, we should have the gold fund, the real estate fund, the socially conscious fund, and there's an unending list of the whatever fund, fill in the blank. If we seek a way to come up with a solution for the small portion of the population without doing anything to change what affects the other 98% of participants that won't use it, a mutual fund window is a way to get there. You can structure it in such a way that the cost of the mutual fund window are the people who use it are the only people who pay for it. The people who don't use it don't pay a nickel for it.
Right.
And I think that's critical. And we certainly have anticipated that we would limit the total amount of a participant's account that could go there. The exact number, whether it's 50% or 25%, is certainly up for debate.
Okay.
But the fundamental policy of the TSP, simplicity, should not change.
Thank you. I yield to the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony and your comments. Let me just mention about the mutual funds, at least as an approach. I would suggest that the idea of choice is a good one, that individuals at different stations in life, different backgrounds, whether they've inherited certain things, they could, there's such an unending array of possibilities that I think to the idea that they can be properly educated and understanding the risks, that they're not just going on to making a quick decision that 15 years from now they may regret, but they can also understand the risk and reward if maybe they want to be a little bit more aggressive. I would hope and encourage and support efforts to move down that path in a cautious way, but at the same time ultimately allowing the individual some degree of choice, and I would support that push on the mutual, at least from the mutual fund point. Mr. Long, I'm a freshman. I'm coming to understand these issues and dive deeper into these. You made quite an assertion about the low administrative costs, and I've certainly heard that far and wide, but it's also my understanding that many of these costs are deferred, if you will, and pushed over to, for instance, Treasury and other groups where you're not actually having the expense. Actually, the taxpayers of the United States are having those expenses. Can you help me understand how self-sufficient and cohesive this group is, as opposed to, and what percentage and what dollars we're talking about are actually shared assets within the federal government, and which are ultimately paid by all the taxpayers in the United States, not just the participants within the TSP?
The TSP does rely on human resource personnel throughout the government. So every agency has a certain number of personnel specialists that are required to pass out information.
I'm going macro here on you. Do you have a sense of our budget is this amount of money and it takes this percentage of? No. Is the short answer, and I do know that one of my predecessors was asked this question years ago, and they were not able to get to an answer and thought we were chasing our tail trying to get there. Our time's short. We got 5 minutes, and I'm sure we can go a couple rounds here. But at some point, I think that's an important number to understand. The self-sufficiency, again, in the big scheme of a $3.9 trillion budget. But to me, the principle of being self-sufficient, allowing the participants to pay for the administrative costs, I think, is an important one. We're at a time where we're $12 trillion in debt, and this is certainly, they're not going to nitpick little things within, but at the same time, I think the principle of self-sufficiency is an important one. I want to also go back to, and I would love to follow up with you and try at some point to tackle that number, if that's okay with you.
Okay, yeah.
And even if it's not, I'd still like to pursue it. So. The implementation of the Roth type option, why does this process take so long? I mean, you're talking about a 2-year window. This can't be that complicated.
Yes, it is. This is an enormous
Explain to me
project.
why it takes 2 years to try to get to implement something that is fairly commonly found.
Right now, and I'll just explain the payroll side, which has nothing to do with us.
Right.
All throughout the government, payroll is done. Multiple agencies do payroll. anytime you have monies that are taken out to the TSP, just like any 401k, those are pre-tax dollars. So
Right.
your paycheck is reduced, your taxable income that year is reduced. Now, all of a sudden, those payrolls are going to need to change to say, okay, your paycheck is reduced, but a portion of that, which is pre-tax, standard 401k, reduces your taxable income. But the other amount that's still going to go to the same 401k plan is going to be Roth. And so it's going to be removed from your paycheck, but it's included in your taxable income. That is just from a payroll side only. That's an enormous change. From our standpoint, we are right now implementing software changes to be able to, for our systems to be able to accept that. You've got record-keeping changes, you've got communication changes. It's a really big deal, is what it boils down to. The other changes on immediate contributions, also a big deal. We're able to do it quickly. Automatic enrollment, a big deal, but it's not half as big as Roth. Roth is an enormous project.
If there are ongoing challenges, things that change the equation, if there's any way to speed up the timeline, will you please let us know? I think we'd like to keep abreast of this and not take years to get through this process. You stated in your testimony, Mr. Long, that the I Fund currently incurred trading costs that kept falling from roughly $16.5 million in 2007 to only $2.1 million in September. How much, just give me a sense of what's happening there. Is that because there's lower, the economic environment has dwindled, or what are the factors that are?
We had a small group, about less than 1% of the total TSP population, that was effectively active traders. They were moving large amounts of money back and forth. So a small population making large transfers on a daily basis. So every day we bundle up all of our total trades and submit a net trade to our investment manager. It gets either buy or sell. It gets executed every day. That comes with a cost. You have to execute those in the different markets. By moving to a policy which we no longer permitted unlimited transfers back and forth. We set a policy where 2 per month unlimited. Reduce the trading activity, therefore reduce the volume of the trades that we submit in the market each day, therefore drastically reduced our expenses. The bottom line is now everybody else, all 4.2 million participants, have a little bit less in total trading expenses because of our policy change to restrict a small number of participants.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know my time's up, and I don't want to take any more time from Mr. Conley because I want to make sure that he's home in plenty of time to watch the election results from the races in Virginia. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. I'm not so sure he's going to be pleased with the results, but the chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
It must be nice, Mr. Chairman, to come from a political culture that's unidimensional. We enjoy our political competition in Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask Mr. Long. And Mr. Long, I'm going to ask you again to please speak into the microphone.
Oh.
I cannot hear you.
Okay.
Tell me what the desirability is from your point of view, at least potentially, of a mutual fund window.
The likelihood of how many participants would use it? It's in the single digits. It'd probably be somewhere between 1% and 4%.
Really?
Yeah, it'd be small.
Given the concerns you've heard raised at the table,
Yeah.
if it's only 1% to 4%, why do we want to pursue this?
We want to get from the 8 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, and eventually a 10 out of 10. What you find is you have a small but very vocal group of disaffected participants. And in the end, do you want to provide solutions that help everybody? What we can do here is for the participants that say, I am very unhappy because I can't execute my desired trade in an equity fund that does not invest in oil companies, that does not invest in tobacco companies, that does not invest in companies which support non-democratic regimes, or does not permit me to execute my investment belief that Japanese airlines are going to be the best investment in 2010. If we want to create a method by which those participants can execute their investment beliefs, a mutual fund window is a way to get that done. It is generally recognized by the consultant community that the ideal 401k design is a core group of small, very broadly diversified funds, exactly what we have today in the 5 funds, plus a small menu of life cycle funds, which we have today. And then add to that, for the small group of self-directed, for the people that are on the frontier, offer them a window to execute their own independent beliefs. That's a way to get it done. We're not doing anything to move forward unless the members of the ETAC, as well as the board, which both, by the way, have divided opinions on this. Until we get those 2 groups together, we're not doing anything on this.
Mr. Cox, you heard that. What's wrong with that approach?
It's my job as a union representative to be concerned about the risk for our members. I would say maybe many members of Congress come from backgrounds that's financial backgrounds and are very savvy with their ability to invest, as well as some other federal employees. I would say out of AFG's membership nationwide, many of whom are housekeeping aides, nursing assistants, nurses, correctional officers, those people, they are not that savvy about investing. They want solid core funds that's dealing with their retirement. People still have the option to go out and invest their monies any way they want to in this country and to buy all type of stocks and mutual funds and anything else they want to invest in. But we're talking about the protection of people's retirement security and the better good of the whole. Even though we talk about only 1% today, there's predatory lending that's been in this country. There's predatory marketing to federal employees about various things. So I just think it's a concern that we have of protecting our membership and that 99% of them.
Mr. Long, if Mr. Cox talks about some inherent risks with going further abroad on the kinds of investments allowed under TSP. If we had opened up TSP to the REIT investment path that had been advocated by some just a few years ago when real estate was at its height, what would have happened to people's investments that went that direction?
They would be very unhappy. Yeah.
They'd be very unhappy?
Unhappy, yeah. I anticipate, if we had, I know there was a proposal to create an R fund, a real estate investment trust fund, and it has been, over the last year, extremely volatile. And as you noted in your comments, for a period of several months, basically fell off a cliff. Yeah, it is if we had a fund at that point, yes, I think the participants in that would not have been happy. But what we're talking about here is something different, is not creating a new core fund, but creating a window by which a small number of participants, with the appropriate protections, to say, before you go through this window, understand there are risks, there are expenses, this is not for the novice investor. But if you choose to invest a portion of your money in a mutual fund through this window, you can do so.
Thank you. My time is up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me ask the participant representatives, so from Mr. Cox all the way down to Colonel Hayden, we're going to, and you've each hit on this a little bit, the need for education, the fact that we have a diversity of financial education within the people that we're serving here. How best does, now we're going to have it with the Roth IRA. That's going to have to be explained already for what we're doing already. It's very likely that the payment of unused sick time and leave time, the bonus issue, how do we get out there? What's the best way, in your experience in representing participants, to get that message out, make sure that people, to the degree possible, are educated about the options here? It would be especially difficult with the mutual fund piece because that can be complex for the best of us. But how do you think we might best accomplish that educational function that's going to happen in any event?
I would suggest two things. One is the website, which you had previously mentioned. More and more investment companies use those websites as, very effective education tools. It needs to be developed, though, far past, as you said, where it is today. That's one way, but the real issue, I think, for a lot of employees is they need someone to talk to. They need someone to be able to ask questions of.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has complicated this in recent years is that that used to be and should be the function of human resources in the agencies. And more agencies are centralizing their human resource functions and pulling them away from the employees who are out there in the cities and the towns across the country, so they're not even there. And as importantly, new agencies like TSA are contracting out all of their human resource work.
Yeah.
So I would see the need for some kind of an outreach from the board to agencies and to human resources because there has to be some face-to-face opportunity for people to ask questions about these things. They're very important decisions, and everyone is at a very different level of what they're confident and able to absorb to make these choices. Otherwise, they're going to stick with the simplest and the most straightforward, and they're going to be afraid, to take advantage even of some of the things that were just passed by Congress this past summer because they won't know how to do that.
Right. And I'm anticipating that, Mr. Long, you've already thought about this with respect to the Roth IRA and some of these other things. How are you proposing this rollout? How's this going to happen?
We are actually doing some research on that right now, trying to figure out what the rest of the world is doing as far as advertising the Roth 401k provision in large 401k plans. There is it is a complicated choice. You move from just talking about basic investment principles to effectively talking about tax minimization strategies.
Right.
Trying to communicate that to 4.2 million people is going to be a challenge. The mechanisms for how we get that done, certainly we will be relying on the website, certainly we will be relying on the human personnel specialists, but Ms. Colleen Kelly is exactly correct. We know that we work with the human resource professionals and they're stretched thin.
Right.
And that is a challenge that we work with every day. We work with OPM as well because they're the party that's primarily responsible for making sure that the government has a financial readiness program. We partner with them and then through the personnel specialists, but there are challenges there.
Yeah. One of the other things, I'm sorry, Margaret?
Thank you. Federal employees need to hear from professional financial advisors because, as Ms. Kelly has said, human resources staff don't necessarily have this expertise, and they are stretched beyond all knowledge. They do not have the time to cope with, they don't have the time to counsel people who are retiring, they don't have the expertise. I agree, we need a better website, we need much more information. It's a tricky subject.
Mr. Chairman, I think I would agree with my other colleagues, and I believe it's that personal touch. I go back to, again, my own years working for the federal government. I went to Human Resources. I got counseling there. I was one of the first participants in the TSP back in 1986, and it was because there was HR people who were present. They could sit down, talk to me about it, and I remember the HR person saying to me, put that 5% right up front, boy, because you'll get that match. But let me tell you something else. Each year when you get a raise, up it another %. Keep going on up because you will want to retire one day and you've got to start preparing early. Mm-hmm. I still remember that advice, and it didn't come from the website or it didn't come by osmosis. It was a person counseling me, probably not on a printed brochure, but it was very, very sound advice.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Connolly, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Long, are there differences between CSRS and FERS with respect to TSP?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Primarily in terms of the government contribution. The CSRS contribution is voluntary. There's no government contribution that goes along with it. For the FERS employees, they have the 1% automatic and then the matching contribution in addition.
What is the rationale for differentiating between the two?
the basic annuity. The annuity for the CSRS is more generous.
More generous.
And for people hired after 1983, they continue to have an annuity, but it is less generous. And along with that, TSP was created, and they also are eligible for Social Security. So you have a three-legged stool for those under FERS.
And have we looked at the actuarial costs of the Roth conversion that you talked about?
I don't think I talked about the Roth conversion. I think the gentleman on the end of the table talked about the Roth conversion.
I'm sorry, who?
Colonel Hayden?
Colonel
Sure, that
Hayden,
was
I'm
mine.
sorry. I'm just wondering whether we've done some cost estimate of what are the implications if we were to do that.
Our organization has done no cost analysis associated with that. Again, as we see this as more of a win-win for both the federal government as well as for the members, because the revenues that would be coming back to the federal government immediately. That's the option that we were looking at, is having some type of conversion.
And Colonel Hayden, military employee or military folks in the military, are they subject to the same kind of rule as CSRS employees with respect to the match and the 1%?
It's my understanding they're more tied towards just the annual contributions, the 16.5 or the 49,000. We do have the limitation associated with the 49,000 if they happen to be in a combat zone. So if you can take up to that amount on top of the 16.5 if you are in a combat zone, and that was a provision in law.
Okay. Members of the uniformed services are not eligible for any government contribution, again, with a similar strategy. They have a pension, a 20-year pension, which is deemed to be considered to be attractive, and that's their primary source of their retirement income.
Are you aware of the fact that the ranking member of this full committee had an amendment that would, in fact, allow the military to qualify for a match similar to FERS employees?
No, it was not.
It might be worth your costing out the implications of such an amendment.
There is one thing I do need to make sure people are clear on, is that the Roth TSP, which would be similar to a Roth 401k, that is meaningfully different than a Roth IRA. My understanding is the IRS does not permit, we're aware of no 401k plans that permit people to take their 401k contributions and convert them to Roth 401k contributions. Matter of fact, I believe, according to the data that I got from the IRS, it's not permissible under tax law. What is permissible today is the conversions of regular IRAs and Roth IRAs, but that's the thinking behind it might be similar, but it's not inside the qualified plan world. It's not permissible today.
Margaret, when I didn't ask you for NAR's position, but what is NAR's position on creating new investment windows, especially maybe a mutual fund window? Margaret, you might want to if you could turn on your mic.
Sorry. We believe it's a little risky without a lot of, there's some people do not have enough information and education. They're really looking to go into retirement with some solid money, and this is much riskier.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess when we look at this kind of issue, if I could conclude, we have to balance the rights of individual members to take risks with their own money. On the other hand, when we're looking at something that is a retirement fund, we have to balance that out. Not so long ago, the previous administration had strongly suggested the idea of disaggregating part of a Social Security payment and allowing folks to invest in the market because it would grow so much more healthy. Of course, had folks done that, the weeping and gnashing of teeth and the opening of 401k statements today would be magnified manyfold, and an awful lot of folks would have found their retirement security in jeopardy. So it's a very serious public policy question, and one that I know we're going to be debating for some time. I thank you all.
I thank you. I know some of this sounds paternalistic or maternalistic, that we're trying to protect the participants here, but I think that we have to realize that if you do, let's take the mutual fund window piece of this. It's not just participants going out through the window. It is retirees being bombarded with marketing information that might be more driven by profit and fees than by best serving the retirement needs of the individual. So I'm concerned about that. Colonel, I want to ask you, you've got flag officers, you've got field officers, you've got, let me think, junior officers versus non-commissioned officers. The education piece, this has to be considerably more complex in your situation as opposed to an agency. You've got folks in much different circumstances. Do you have any specific concerns about being able to go out and educate? I mean, I've been in Iraq and Afghanistan so many times, and those folks are on the internet all the time. They're on more than I am, and much more savvy than I am in that respect. But you've got such a wide, diversity of position and circumstances, as well as financial education within the group that you represent.
Well, it's an interesting scenario. When the actual TSP option was first offered to the uniformed services, I was actually at the Pentagon at the time in a role of sitting in the J1 trying to figure out exactly what this TSP option was going to provide. So the education piece was even critical when we first had the option of participating. This now provides even a broader base of, depending on your financial situation, depending on what your tax bracket's going to be, it's going to be even more critical for a junior troop to have an understanding of what they intend to have as their taxable income in retirement compared to their taxable income that they're currently looking at. And when you throw in that some of these folks are deploying into the combat zone, getting tax-free benefits as it is associated with it, how generous that can actually be when it comes to actually just contributing to the TSP, it's important. What took place then, and what I would hope will take place before the rollout of the Roth option, is that the services will do, once again, we called them road shows. We would take our HR personnel, get them smart on the issue, go out and have mandatory formations where you would have to go out and get the briefing so that you had an understanding of exactly what this was being provided to you. And we have that option with the uniformed services to do something just like that.
Yeah.
The website is going to be critical because, as you say, the younger troops today, they live on it. They understand it, they go out there, they do their research, and that's how they find the information. The older horses like myself, it was a little bit more difficult for me to get an understanding of contributing, but when I did have that HR person sit down to me and said, start out with the 1%, grow it each year, every time you get a promotion, every time you get a change in pay associated with the way you're doing business, if you get flight pay increases, put a portion of that into your TSP account. Save for yourself, save for your future. And that's how we did the business. But you had to have that one-on-one.
Right. Well, I appreciate, I think this hearing has certainly elicited some of the conflicts here. And so, while I said at the outset I'm very happy with the TSP, we need to move forward, and we are. But I think we have to do so with a certain degree of caution as to the interests of the people that we all represent, these participants now and in the future. But I want to thank you very much for your willingness to come before the committee and help us with our work. We have benefited greatly by your perspectives and by your recommendations. I can't guarantee that you won't be asked to appear here again, maybe around the time that we're rolling this out, so that we can keep a closer tab on things and maybe respond to some of the issues that you've raised here today. But thank you very much for your participation, and you're free to go. Hearing is now adjourned.